It's all about nutrient efficiency, right?
Exactly.
I've taught you all the things that you know.
Oh, yeah, here we go.
I'm Sherry Cook. I'm passionate about helping farmers with crop nutrition, and I'm here to help you with your operation.
Thank you, Randy, for those markets, and thank you for joining us here at the Red River Farm Network Forum this morning. My name is Jamie Dickerman with the Red River Farm Network.
I'm Tyler Donaldson. Thanks for joining us here, and welcome to Big Iron 2026, everyone. This is our weather forum. We're getting started off here. We have a couple of great panelists here that are going to share some of their expertise with you. Down by Jamie over there is Daryl Ritchison. Daryl is the North Dakota State Climatologist. He's also the director of NDON, the North Dakota North Dakota Ag Weather Network. And Daryl's joining us here from, rather previously, he spent time as a meteorologist in both Sioux Falls and Fargo, but he's joining us here today. Thank you, Daryl. We also have Laura Edwards with us. Laura is the South Dakota State Climatologist. She's been with SDSU since 2011. And before that, she was with the Western Regional Climate Center in Reno, Nevada. Laura, thank you for joining us as well. So with that, we're going to get started here. If you all don't mind, top of mind, I think, for most everyone here is probably harvest and what we can expect for harvest weather here. So just to get us started, Daryl, if you don't mind, talking harvest here, what are the biggest weather factors farmers need to watch over here the next month?
I think that really depends on your location. About half of North Dakota was pretty wet this summer, half of it was pretty dry, and there wasn't very many people in between. Classic North Dakota weather for us. But no matter what we really experienced over the course of the summer, there's just a lot of reasons to believe the autumn will be drier than average and a little bit above average in temperatures. If you survive the freeze this past weekend, I do believe moving forward in time, things are looking pretty good. Of course, that will mean during the peak harvest, it will rain 3 days in a row, and people will call me and tell me that my forecast was wrong, because that's just Murphy's Law. But I think generally September and October, most areas I really think will be a little bit above average temperatures, balancing off how the month started. And then precipitation-wise, looks like it's trending back a little bit drier. Many of you probably have noticed, really had not rained much in the last 2 or 3 weeks. There's certainly been exceptions to that, but overall, it hasn't rained all that much. So I think that trend probably now will continue. We have really, I think, a La Nina developing in the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Decadal Oscillation, if you've ever been to any of my talks, I talk about it quite a bit, is strongly negative. Those two factors combined, and oddly, people sometimes forget, but even the Indian Ocean, there's this thing called the Indian Ocean Dipole, is in its negative phase. That also tends to trend warmer in North Dakota as well. So we have 3 factors there, plus a couple more I could go into, but I won't. That it's always, when you see these and you look at analogs, you look at the past, what's happening currently, it might work 3 times out of 4, which is really good odds. As I always say, if you're in Vegas and you have a 75% chance of winning, you're never leaving Vegas. And you're going to buy NDON, a really cool helicopter to fly around to our stations as a reward. But that doesn't mean that 3/4 isn't 100%. And so, there's always, take it with a little bit of grain of salt. But from my perspective, it looks pretty promising.
How about south of the border in South Dakota, Laura?
Yeah, I think a lot of what Daryl said too depends where you're at. Northeastern South Dakota has been extremely wet. Some areas had the record wettest August. Britain, right in the far northeast, had 11.29 inches in August, their all-time wettest month, back to the record starting 1881. So that's a lot of months. And so that's just indicative indicative of the very wet trend we've had in the northeastern part of the state. So we really need that warmth to come through. I agree with Daryl that September for sure looks warmer than average as we're looking at things now for the next few weeks. Hopefully that carries over into October, and because we really need that time to get things drying down. There's a lot of standing water out there in the fields. Further south, things are turning. Soybeans are turning. Leaves are starting to drop, and so things are progressing pretty quick now in that southeastern part of the state. But as you move more towards the south central, not so much harvest, but looking at winter wheat, that area has been dry. So we're looking at potentially starting off dry for that planting in that south central part of the state, at least here in the next couple of weeks.
So about the frost that came through, how much frost did you see in South Dakota, Laura?
So it was really patchy, but all over the state. So what we saw over the weekend, a lot of localized reports of light frost damage, nothing too severe on the row crop side. We saw it hit more in the horticulture, gardening, produce side of things, and yards. But again, I don't think anything really severe. We've had just a couple small areas in the far western, which is out of the row crop area, get down to 28 to a hard freeze. But we did have, over the weekend, a number of local areas that got down to 32 or colder. But really just for a brief time even, so it wasn't, long duration event either. So very limited, I'd say, in any damage over the weekend.
Daryl, I know we just did our crop tour that we do, our annual crop tour that we do, and we saw a lot of green grass out in western North Dakota, and that seemed to be a little bit odd, especially this time of the year. There seems to be not much drought, or less than 2% of the state in drought. Is that correct? Is that abnormal?
Well, actually, technically zero drought, because abnormally dry, which you see in the far little bit of the northeast corner, is not technically considered drought. Not that definitions sometimes matter to people, but western North Dakota, if you just want to play statistics, what we're seeing there this year is probably a 1 in 6 year, 7 year, to have enough moisture that it stays green through the entire year. And this year is more, in some ways, you almost could try a little bit more noticeable or shocking, is because not only, really western North Dakota, almost the entire state has been so dry this decade. The last 5 years has been far more below average areas than above average areas. And of course, western North Dakota being just a much drier climate. Being 1 inch below average in this part of the state, in the Red River Valley, very doable. 1 inch below average out west is a big deal. That could easily be 20% of their summer moisture in some areas. So that's why them being so green this year is just great to see. And on a net positive, although they don't have the best soil type, they did really replenish some of the reservoirs that are out there. The stream flows are pretty good for their standards in some of the smaller streams, but at least they have some soil moisture that should stay through the winter as we freeze up. So, we do a little bit of winter wheat. That's more of a South Dakota thing, of course, as everyone knows. But when we get started with our spring wheat harvest out there in canola and other grain crops, I think there will be at least a good start next spring for them. Whereas this year, they finished well, but, they really started really dry out there.
What about South Dakota, Laura? Abnormally dry southern part of the state. How's this moisture situation there?
Yeah, the south central part of the state, that area of dryness and drought has really developed over the summer. It was not that severe earlier in the season, and so that's kind of reemerged over the last couple of months. At the end of August, they had a couple rain events that kind of held off further degradation of that area. But from there all the way to the southwestern corner of the state, we've heard, of some of those small grain crops that they have down there have really been stressed with the recent dryness. And that southwestern corner, there's some irrigated land down there, and outside of that, they've just really struggled to get above water, so to speak, on the drought situation. Really just they've had a couple years of just lingering drought, kind of ebbing and flowing, and their stream flows out down that way, coming off the southern Black Hills, has been pretty low, historically speaking. So even their water for irrigation, although they didn't have any cutoff orders, if any, but is pretty touch and go there for a little bit. So it's something we're keeping an eye on, though, for sure. Again, as I mentioned, as we get into the winter wheat planting season and that small grain season.
Just a reminder real quick, everyone, we do want this to be an interactive forum, so if you have any questions at all, just look for one of us in the Red River Farm Network shirts out there. We should have microphones available. Flag one of us down, raise your hand, whatever you need to do. We'll get your question asked of these individuals up here. With that, I believe this is the second summer, maybe longer, someone correct me, who's been here longer than me, but facing wildfire smoke again from Canadian wildfires here. What sort of impact do those have, what sort of influence, rather, do those have on the weather that we see here in the Dakotas, if you guys don't mind? Daryl, if you don't mind.
Weather-wise, I would really say none. And even talking with the agronomists and specialists at NDSU, I've had several conversations with them. You know, they will say, you know, if anything, it might have a net positive on small grains because they, of course, don't like, you know, as much sunshine. And of course, it has a little bit of a net negative on some of the row crops, but they say it's so small that it's really not detectable. You don't see any really yield reductions, and it's hard to do any, you know, what was the real reason why things might have been up or down a little bit. You know, just to have smoke in there. It's, to me, just more of a, you know, it's a health hazard for those with asthma and et cetera, and it's just really annoying for everyone else because you just, you know, you want to go out, especially if you're in eastern North Dakota, you're going out to the Minnesota lakes, and Minnesota had it worse than North and South Dakota did this summer, and it's more of that, you know, visibility issue. But, you know, the real root cause here is that part of Canada, you know, the taiga, where all the forests are up there, has had really two, no surprise to anyone, very dry summers. And so some of them are just, you know, sadly, many of them are human created, sadly, but, you know, lightning strikes up there, just dry lightning. It's just 2 dry summers in a row, and let's all cross our fingers that we don't have 2026 summer spoiled by more forest fires up there. But I'll be honest, we have to remember now, there are fires in northwestern United States now. You know, so some of we can't keep blaming the Canadians. Love you, Canada, by the way, I'm just teasing you. But we also in the Northwest now, so some of the smoke recently has also been a little bit from the Pacific Northwest. There's been some fires because they've had a very dry summer out there. Very warm summer, very dry summer. And both areas really, to me, it's going to linger at least through the middle of October. And that's usually when we start seeing snow in some of these areas, higher elevations in the United States, just up the boreal forest up in Canada, that's really going to squelch it. So we're still going to, I think, be in and out of it for a few more weeks.
So would it be safe to say more of an impact on the personnel than the crops themselves?
From everything I hear, I always remind people I'm a meteorologist and a state climatologist now. I do not pretend I'm an agronomist, although sometimes people think I am.
Fair.
I might add to that, though, that smoke cover acts a little bit like cloud cover, so it kind of reduces your daytime maximum, so you get a little less of those really extreme hot days that can really affect corn, for example. And so I think that's been partly a factor in contributing to our generally moderate temperatures this summer. We haven't had extreme, you know, long duration heat events or anything like that, but also elevates your overnight temperatures, raises your overnight temperatures. So it kind of, you know, narrows that change of temperature from daytime to nighttime. You don't get that extreme hot or extreme cold. But in South Dakota, we haven't had as much smoke as up here. I think we've had a little more southerly flow this season, which has brought a lot of our moisture from the Gulf. So that's kind of been our alternate trade-off. Instead of smoke, we've got a lot of moisture.
Yeah, and Laura made a really good point. But the other, you know, going to that coolness factor, how do we get Canadian smoke down here? You know, exactly. That means the lower and mid-level winds are coming in out of the north. And so if it would have been a summer like 2021, when there's a ridge of high pressure, say the jet stream is flowing through Canada much of the summer to our north, we would have had very minimal impacts from the smoke as well. But because there's very commonly a trough, we just had that flow coming in out of Canada a lot, especially when we didn't have our rainy periods or dry periods, you know, also attributed, you know, to the coolness of the summer was that pattern to bring it down. Because you can have all the smoke in the world up there, you know, it has to come here. You know, our general flow is from the west, but this summer we had a lot of instances where we had that northwesterly flow coming in, bringing that smoke down to us as well.
With that, well, let's move forward here. We talked harvest a bit and fall harvest here, but let's move ahead to winter and spring previews here, if you guys don't mind. Once the combines are put away, what should we expect for winter, and how could that set us up for spring planting? Laura, if you don't mind starting.
Yeah, like Daryl mentioned earlier, La Nina is looking at to be set up here for this winter season. And oftentimes here in the far north, that means colder than average temperatures over the winter. But what we've seen the last several instances of La Nina in the winter season is that the winters start off pretty mild. And we really see February punctuate the winter with very cold temperatures. We saw that last year and a couple other recent La Nina winters, where February is kind of the month that it has centered on with those colder than average temperatures. So not necessarily over the whole entire winter season. On precipitation side, that's a little more challenging to predict. La Nina and El Nino, neither one of them really give us a good indicator of wintertime precipitation. We do see long-term trends with increasing in the winter season. We've had a couple mild winters lately, or low snowfall winters, I should say, lately. So something even near normal might seem like a lot for us, I think. Yeah, I think precipitation's a little harder to pin down. But like Daryl said, the moisture we've had here the late summer, we're basically refilling our bank account. We're recharging our soils, holding that moisture for the spring season. So on that aspect, I think at least a lot of eastern South Dakota, neighboring west central Minnesota is probably in pretty good shape, at least as soil moisture goes, to get started.
Anything to add to that, Daryl?
Well, Laura makes an interesting point, and it's really true. La Ninas tend to start off winter slow, and so in turn, that goes back to harvest again. And one of the reasons I'm, kind of positive about the harvest, that the fall will be reasonably nice. The interesting thing is El Nino, the exact opposite. A lot of times they start off harsh, and people are going, "Oh no, it's going to have one of these 6-month winters," but then it turns out nice and tame and beautiful. And of course, there's exceptions to all of this, but there's always different flavors of La Nina. The odds are that this one, like last year, will be a weak one. And if you look at week one, what Laura said is very true also in North Dakota. The range with weak La Ninas with precipitation in North Dakota is all over the map. But a high percentage of them, like the last 2 winters, tend to be drier than average. But, just playing statistics here, already talked about this, we've had 2 really snowless winters in North Dakota. Last year, eastern North Dakota here in Red River Valley, we did actually have the winters. Both of them finished above average. Last winter, which most of you, unless you're out there, don't recall, western North Dakota had a really cold winter last year. They're like -3, -4 anomalies, which is very noticeable. Last winter is very, very big difference. But in North Dakota, the last time we had 2 winters in a row with very little snow was way back in the 1950s. Looking back, and Bismarck has the longest records from 1875, Fargo second at 1881 in the state. And then there's sporadic, a lot of stuff started in the 1890s. If you really just look at that, we've really never had 3 winters in a row with way below average snowfall. It's only happened really a couple of times. And so in turn, what Laura said, and I said this, a lot of my talks, is, hey, so we get 45, 50 inches of snow this winter, it's going to seem like, oh my goodness, all this snow, but that's just back, quote unquote, to average. So I'd be just, again, not forecasting, just playing with statistics here, be a little surprised if we would have 3 winters in a row with, say, 50% or less of the average snowfall.
Something that we talk a lot about, or we've been talking about, is water levels dropping in lower Mississippi River, dry conditions, Ohio River Valley. Talk about what's happening there in that particular region. Either one of you can go.
Yeah, I mean, they've had a number of fall seasons lately that have affected transportation of grain on the Mississippi, and But lately, I don't know that that's the case. I don't think that's going to be a factor necessarily this season. I haven't heard any indication of that. In fact, the Southern Plains region, just like up here, all through the middle part of the country, has been pretty wet this season. So I'm not expecting much lower than average flows on the Mississippi this year. So hopefully that part of the equation on the dollars and cents side isn't too much of an issue.
Yeah, it's been wet. I'd be shocked. I agree 100% with Laura. There's been so much rain, and really the core areas where a lot of that moisture's coming. The Ohio River Valley's been wet. The mid-Mississippi has been wet, and all that moisture has to flow down there this fall. So I think it will keep the river levels up. But again, the river levels last couple of years have been low is because much of the Midwest have been drier than average. Too. So, all that rain and all that water has to come someplace from the upper basins, and it's been dry, plus they've been dry as well. But I'd be surprised if it's much of an issue. We'd have to never say never in this business. We could go the next 45 days and most of the United States gets stuck, no rainfall. But there's just so much groundwater, everything's going into the Mississippi, we should be pretty good this year.
Mm-hmm.
What about other parts of the world that you guys pay attention to? South America, Canada, I know we look a lot at South America for what's going on down there. How much do you pay attention to that?
I just spent an hour talking about South American weather before I came here today, so I can tell you a little bit there. That we were really kind of in cold, neutral conditions in the Pacific Ocean. Really, to me, there's two areas of the planet when there's a La Nina that is really a strong indicator. One of them is really Argentina and far southern Brazil, and the other one's Australia and Southeast Asia. And when there is a La Nina, really of any flavor, weak or strong or everything, you tend, especially Argentina tends to be dry. And they've been dry a lot this decade because we've been perpetually that way. Whereas as you progress north into Brazil, especially say Mato Grosso, their main area for safrinha corn and also for soybeans, it tends to be a little bit wetter up there. This past growing season for them, really that La Nina faded away. It was more neutral, and things worked out really, really well for them. When I said just talking some folks from that area actually this morning, and just going, now that we're going back, I think this La Nina is going to be a little bit stronger than most people think. Probably Argentina in particular, some of the southern provinces of Brazil probably are going to be drier than average, but they have had a replenishment of soil moisture. They did down there, number one. Number two, it doesn't mean everyone's going to be dry, but I would sense that we would get a little pullback in this upcoming growing season for them, especially first crop, which in many cases is soybeans.
Laura, anything to add to that?
No, I think you covered it pretty well. He's way more in tune with that than I am, at least for today.
Well, and again, we want this to be interactive, so if any questions that you guys have, flag down one of the blue shirts, and we'll definitely get your question answered up here.
Keeping it regional here, are either of you noticing any north-south or east-west differences in weather patterns here?
I would always just say the atmosphere is a nonlinear, chaotic system, and it does what it wants to do, and every year is unique and different. If I had to say anything in the last 4 months that to me has been at least, I don't know, in the 10% profile, whatever statistic, or a little bit unique about this summer, is number one, we had no wind this summer. And July and August tend to be our least windy months. But the hay crop in North Dakota, everyone complained this summer that they could not dry it off. And everyone blamed the rain. And I go, no, that obviously was a factor, but it was never windy this summer. And it's always funny, every time we get through a 2-week period where it's just windy, 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 I always get these phone calls from people who go, wow, I can't remember the last time it was this windy. And I try not to laugh on the phone because it's North Dakota and South Dakota. This is wind heaven here, And I'm just going, really? Really? You can't remember what it's kind of funny to me. Not a single person this summer said, geez, Daryl, this has been just really unusually calm summer. Well, the calm summer, in turn, we did have some moisture. We had very dewy mornings. Some folks will think we're going to get a lot of snow from the fog thing, wives' tale. We'll see what happens. I'm not going to go there. But we had a tough time drying the hay in many ways because the wind wouldn't blow to add to that evaporation potential this summer. So I found that kind of nice in a way, but it also, because of the moisture, the mosquitoes were a little bit more noticeable. Well, we didn't have Mother Nature blowing those away this summer either. So it's, it's a combinational effect. And then the other thing is to have 2020 and 2025 with this early of a freezes. I mean, you got to go back to 1880s. I mean, this was the 5th earliest freeze on record in 145 years. And to have 2 very early freezes, only 5 years apart, again, you'd have to go back to 1880s. It has been, I mean, if you want to call something unusual, to do it. I always tell people, every year in North Dakota, northwestern Minnesota, pretty much, around, say, the 10th of September, we get that first scare. But it's always 38 to 42, and not really much happens. 2020 and this year, we're in the 20s, low 30s. I mean, our end-on station northwestern North Dakota dropped to 30 on August 24th. You'd have to go back to 2004 for that. So really the lack of wind and really these 2 very early freezes it was, I would say, unique. We might not see 2 early freezes. I'm sure we'll see early freezes, don't get me wrong. But to get 2 so close together, we might have to wait 30 years to see that. Or again, I found that, just knowing the climate record of North Dakota quite well, was very, you could use the term unusual for that, I think.
Yeah, the early frost is unusual also because it's more humid. Usually you see that in drought years where that dry air can cool very rapidly at night, and you get that fluke day early in the season where it gets, the bottom falls out and it gets cold. But last week we really had that cold, that cold weather just kind of hang over us and contribute to multiple days of very cool temperatures. And yeah, the hay problem too, we heard in South Dakota, but we also had lack of wind, but it was also, I think, increased cloud cover with as much humidity as we had. And in the months of July and August together, that 2-month period, we had record high dew points in eastern and north central South Dakota. And so you could feel it, it's palpable, and Daryl mentioned the fog and the still days. And yeah, we had a lot of fog and all of that, just a lot of moisture in the environment that has really slowed down that hay drying down. But when you're looking at, kind of more nationally, west is very dry. He mentioned the wildfires, that's a huge thing out west. Something else that has been noticeable is a very low hurricane activity in the Atlantic, very quiet as far as tropical storms go. And sometimes that can change our weather pattern depending what's coming up the Gulf and that kind of area too. So looking more broadly, yeah, that's kind of what I've seen across the country. We're kind of pickle in the middle, I guess, between that dry area and then kind of the quiet hurricane season, which is a big rain generator for them. So they, in some part in the southeast, rely on tropical activity. So they could be getting into a drought if they don't get something, a couple events here on the other side of the country.
Yeah, I'm really glad Laura brought that up because the other ocean is also very quiet. That's the typhoon numbers are way down as well. And a lot of times typhoon will make that swing along the east coast of Asia, Japan, head up to Alaska. And again, hurricanes are very important for climate and the planet. Takes all the heat from the equator, moves it north, transports, and actually a very important influencer on the planet. But a lot of times then it will dislodge, the colder air in the Arctic because the hurricane went up there and then send it down to the south. But, we've had very few typhoons in the last 3 years. To partially, I think one of the core reasons there is La Nina, the Pacific Ocean is a little colder than average, and then you just get a little bit of tropical stuff. But the Atlantic Ocean's been making up for that, but not this year. The weather community, I don't know if Laura was paying attention, but Gabrielle, which never developed, was this, I think the Hurricane Center, and I'm not picking on them, trust me. You all know I've been forecasting a long time and make horrible forecasts. It's part of the business. But they had, I think at one point, a 90% chance that this was going to develop. And it went from 90 to 70 to 50 to 20 to 0. And I'll be honest, as a meteorologist looking at, oh yeah, that should develop into something. Nope. That's that whole nonlinear chaotic system thing coming into play. But that's an example of it's just, it's good news for property damage. We don't want hurricanes, but again, the tropical moisture is important, playing in. So really the 2 core oceans, the Atlantic and the Pacific, tropically, have been on the quiet side.
Okay, great. I think we have a question at the audience.
Hi. Okay. Daryl, with the freeze that we had this last weekend, what was the coldest temperature that was recorded at the end-on stations, North Dakota, Minnesota?
26 was the coldest, but I had another conversation about this. Endon, we have a temperature sensor at 20 inches at all of our stations. And that's we have 2 inversion levels if you use our versions for spraying. We have one that goes from a half a meter, 20 inches, to 3 meters, 10 feet. And then the other one more for aerial pilots is from 5 feet, 30 feet. So that'd be 1.5 meters to 9 meters. So we have that 20-inch sensor sitting there. Official temperatures, depending on which network, are usually 5 to 6 feet, either 1.5 meters or 2 meters around the globe. Endon does 5 because it's better for agriculture. But anyway, my point is, 20 inches, there's crops down there, and we had about 50 of our 250 stations that were in the 20s at 20 inches. And we had some sensors in the low to mid 20s for several hours. So that's why there was great variability on elevation, soil type, crop usage, even different varieties did differently. But the positive, and Laura briefly mentioned this about South Dakota too, then the positive for us was most areas are only that really cold for 2 or 3 hours during that time limit. But when I was up both mornings really early, even 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, first thing I was doing was looking at that half meter data, and it just was, so again, officially 26, but again, we had temperatures in the low 20s at some of our 20-inch sensors.
Where was that?
The coldest was in north-central North Dakota for the 26. Most of northeastern North Dakota, where you're at, most of the Endon official sensors were at temperatures were at 32, 33, 31, 32, 33 is very common, but almost all the sensors in the northern Red River Valley, that 20-inch one, pretty much all of them did drop into the upper 20s at 20 inches. That's the bad news.
Thank you.
Bringing up Endon, and I'm sure most everybody in this room is familiar with it, but maybe if you're not, talk about some of the other information available there, because it's a plethora of information available at your fingertips with that.
It is, and I will say give Laura a chance, because the South Dakota Mesonet is turning off to be awesome. What are you all up to, 70, 80 now?
No, over 100 stations.
Over 100 now,
Over
so I'm
100
even
ground.
behind.
Yep.
It's hard to keep up. But both South Dakota and North Dakota were, we're very fortunate. We were part of a $40 million+ grant to put weather stations in the upper Missouri River Basin. So in South Dakota, that's almost the entire state, and North Dakota kind of splits this in two. So we were able, and we've just finished the project, and South Dakota and the other states still have some work to do, but they have more work to do than we did. But anyway, those stations for the upper Missouri were to add soil moisture data, crucial in agriculture, but neither South Dakota nor North Dakota really had a lot of those. Now we both do. And then also, we now have all-season precipitation gauges. And I will always contend, and I still do, that in North Dakota, and I would say this by Minnesota, South Dakota, all the northern plains, the one climate parameter we really did not have good information on was winter precipitation. Because you'll get 100 people give you snow totals. And most of those I wouldn't trust, because 90% of people walk out on their deck and put a ruler in and they got 6 inches and there's no snow on their roof. I wonder where all that snow is, it's on their deck, for example. But at least I'm glad they're reporting, don't get me wrong. But how much liquid is in that? Our co-op observer network from NOAA, and I'm sure this is true in South Dakota too, is just dying away because we just can't get those volunteers anymore to bring us that weather information, that liquid precipitation in winter. And really this grant for North and South Dakota, was Montana, Wyoming, and a little bit of Nebraska as well, all went down to the 2011 flooding in the Missouri River. They just had to open up the dams because there was so much water there. Now we have data all around it. So it's that type of data we have, but Endon has a lot of crop guidance, all the basics of growing degree days, but we have a lot of disease forecasters. This summer, we released our white mold for soybeans this summer, but fusarium head blight guidance for the wheat, for example. We also have, of course, Cercospora for the sugar beet growers all through western Minnesota and here in the Red River Valley, and a number of other things too. But I want to give Laura a chance to talk about their mesonet as well.
Sure, yeah. In our state, the mesonet is parallel to me, and Daryl knows this. Nathan Edwards runs it, so you could say I'm married to the mesonet in a way.
No pun intended,
but,
right?
yeah, it's been phenomenal. Getting 5-minute data too has been really great. And like Daryl said, the all-season precipitation gauges, they have a heated rim, so it melts any frozen precipitation snow as it falls. And so we're learning a whole lot about that wintertime precipitation. And one thing Daryl did not mention is our weather cams, our weather cameras. We've captured, and I know you've captured some tornadoes, we've captured some phenomenal weather. It's really a quality check to see that all our sensors are working, but it's been really a boon to what we know and understand about weather and climate across the state.
Yeah, Andon now has 162 cameras on there. I've personally tend to go storm chasing now on cameras instead of my car. But this summer I saw 8 tornadoes on our cameras. I've seen 12 total. The National Weather Service in Grand Forks has issued a number of early tornado warnings, not only based on Doppler radar, but also just visually seen from our cameras. The June 21st devastation, I get the credit because I'm the director, but it's my staff that does all the work, and they're the ones that actually deserve the credit. But putting all these stations, the Weather Service offices, emergency managers, everyone, how much that night, how much our stations and the cameras and the data was useful for that, because if without some of the data, we had areas that had hurricane force winds for 90 minutes, which many of you remember. The thing is, would someone have called that in? Maybe, maybe not, but you could see it live every 5 minutes on our stuff. And so we knew something unique was happening, issue those warnings, know what's happening, get people out there in advance about the damage. It comes in very critical. So it's a really great tool. And once this project is done, there will be from Montana, North Dakota, all that's 540 stations, either upgraded or new. North Dakota is 85, but about half of those were just upgrades for us. But Andon is working with a partnership with Minnesota, the Minnesota Department of Ag. So it's MON, the Minnesota Agricultural Weather Network. There will be 2 stations this week, one up in Viking and one near Fawcett in northwestern Minnesota, so kind of on the edge of the valley. They got a grant from the Clean Water Fund in Minnesota, so we are building out hopefully another 70 in Minnesota, but they're all on our websites. They all run through NDSU. They all run through our servers. They get all of our tools instantly. And so with Minnesota and North Dakota, we will eventually have probably a little over 300 weather stations in the 2 states, and we do have a few stations, 6 stations in Montana as well.
We have another question right down here.
Yeah, you mentioned that we were lower on wind, of course, for the haying aspect of things, but the June 20th, you touched on it a little bit there. The devastation was from Dickinson to Bemidji, and we were in the Laverne, Hope, Page area where there was elevators, bins, terrible destruction everywhere. But I've been in North Dakota my whole life, and we've seen lots of thunderstorms, and it's usually 15 minutes, 30 minutes, they're done, or a few tornadoes. This was, like you said, 90 minutes or 2, where we were about 3 hours of the 100+ mile an hour wind, and it went for so long. What cooked up that guy? I mean,
As a rear inflow jet behind a mesoscale area of low pressure, mesoscale is kind of small. And if you watch the radar that night, you notice the whole radar was spinning. And that was a small area of low pressure. And what that was doing is right on the back side of it. So that corridor you mentioned was reasonably narrow, but it's never narrow when you're in the middle of it, obviously. But it was remarkable with all the Andon stations, frequent gusts into the 90s, and over here, frequent gusts into the 40s, and sometimes only 10 miles. They get in there. So that rear inflow jet, as that was moving across, brought, really in some ways, simplistic terms, the jet stream down and wrapped it down to the ground. And because it was moving so slowly, then we had the long duration winds. So we did have the straight line winds that are pretty normal. Sadly, the tornadoes that killed some people, but that's, kind of typical severe weather for us. And that moved on, but then you folks in that corridor remained, for a couple of hours behind it. So it was kind of a unique setup. I will remind people, in 1995, we had 2 derecho events back-to-back in North Dakota with over 100-mile-per-hour winds. So it's not like it's totally unique. It's just something that doesn't happen all that commonly, and let's hope that doesn't happen in the rest of our lifetimes, what happened that night.
To that direction of derecho, till Iowa had that derecho a couple of years ago, I don't think I've ever heard that term. So this seems like is it?
Oddly, the term derecho was, came from Iowa in the 1800s. Believe it or not, it's been with us for 150 years at least. The term, it's just, there's a definition for derecho, and it's really, it really needs to go like 300 miles. And North Dakota and South Dakota both about 350 miles across. So it's something that has to go at least that distance. So to get technically not derechos to be that might only go 100 or 200 miles, almost happens every summer. It's just the long, devastating ones are a little bit more rare.
Yeah, in South Dakota, the last year we had severe derechos 2022. If you remember, May of that year, it hit basically the I-29 corridor, all the way up and down across the state. And then there's a second one a few weeks later that was more in the southeastern part of the state. But yeah, he's right. It's, a wind speed, it's the size of the storm, the distance it travels. There's really that kind of definition there. And it's something we learn about in college classes, right? But now it's becoming more into the vernacular, into our vocabulary. And in South Dakota, we see derechos, every 2 to 4 years, something like that. So not too uncommon, but something as severe as that and as large scale as that is really quite unusual and significant.
And sadly, a lot of this year was not the case, but the more common time period of the year to get derechos is later in the summer, and guess where the corn is later in the summer? If that derecho in North Dakota would have hit, say, on around the 1st of August rather than June 20th when the corn was only this high, generally it was just, barely, most folks weren't even knee high yet at that point, it would have been the Iowa thing all over. It'd been hundreds of millions of dollars of probably lost corn. So that was the only, if you can throw a little net positive, was that. On the negative side, most of the soybeans were like this then, and they just got grounded to shreds with all the soil being loosened with the strong winds. So it's kind of a little bit of a positive for corn, disastrous for soybeans. But it was a little unique that we got one so bad in June. Usually in North Dakota, because we're farther north, we'd get them even a little bit later than South Dakota. Like in 1995, the back-to-back ones were later on in the summer, for example. But I tell you, the summer solstice, June 20th, is just jinxed in North Dakota. That's when the Fargo tornadoes, the derechos occurred this time. If you go back and look through the news and what has happened weather-wise on the summer solstice in North Dakota, it's just, it's Mother Nature.
It's also my wife's birthday, so that maybe says something too.
I don't know. But yeah, there's been just a lot of bad weather events on the summer solstice in North Dakota through the years.
We have about maybe 10-ish minutes left before we get to our sort of summarization section. I did want to ask, though, just looking ahead 5 to 10 years, how you guys view any potential changes in climate variability that could shift up or shake up crop choices or management strategies in the region. Laura?
Well, that's a big question.
I know, and I saved it here for the very end.
Yeah, we talked about winter outlook quite a bit here a little bit today, and I think that's something looking ahead towards increasing wintertime precipitation. But at the same time, winters are getting warmer faster than any other season. And so we might see a shorter snow season, maybe more rain. Instead of the frozen type. So I think that's something to keep in mind as you're managing your farm, your farmland, your soils, how to hold and retain liquid precipitation instead of snow precipitation. One thing we haven't talked about here much is the livestock side too, and thinking of spring seasons and what that means for calving and animal health and all that kind of thing. And again, with that warmer winter and wetter springs that we've been seeing, managing the mud, making sure that they're protected and healthy during that calving season, I think is another aspect that I think about on the farm side. But our growing seasons are getting longer, so I'm optimistic, that we could take advantage of the full season, full frost-free season, and continue to get some really good yields out of this side in the Western Corn Belt. We've had some really good trends out this region, and I'm optimistic that will continue.
Great. Daryl, anything to add to that?
In many ways, I'd say the opposite for North Dakota. For a couple of reasons. Number one, our winter trend in North Dakota is actually colder. Last year evened it back out, but the last 30 years, our trend has been for colder winters in North Dakota, not warmer. And I know we're perhaps a little bit unique in that. And the other thing is, and our growing seasons in North Dakota really have not lengthened. I know that's different. When you're dealing with growing seasons, you really have to watch which stations you're using. If you use Fargo, seasons are 11 days longer than they used to be. Yeah, and we used to keep the temperature in Fargo for 30 years on a rooftop. You can't use that data for it. It's an invalid climate data. Bismarck, for example, records from 1875 to present, there is really no trend in 145 years in growing seasons in Bismarck because that record's been kept more pristine. It's not impacted by urban heat island or the person on the farm ended up putting his thermometer 3 feet from his house when it used to be 40 feet from his house. I mean, you have to watch those things. And so, but every state, every region is going to be a little bit different going forward. And the other thing I will say is the whole game, in a way, if you want to call it that, of normals, okay? Every 10 years, the normals change. The averages change. So on January 1st, 2021, the averages changes. And those averages change from 1981 to 2010 to 1991 to 2020. What did we change? We took the 1980s out, which was generally a very dry, droughty decade, and replaced it by the 2010s, which was kind of average or above. So most sites in North Dakota and the Midwest, including South Dakota, the average rainfall increased several inches. So I get this comment all the time. So Daryl, considering that I was only 80% of normal rain this year, I really had some good yields. Well, and I'd always tell them, you do realize that if this amount of rain fell in 2019, you had average rain this year. The current average is skewed because the 1990s were phenomenally wet. 1993 in Des Moines, Iowa, had almost 30 inches above average during a devastating flooding. So that 1 year added an inch to their average precipitation. So in turn, I have been forecasting the 2020s to be drier than average for 20 years. And so far, I've pretty much nailed it. Why? Because I know how to play statistics. Because I knew in the 2020s, the rainfall averages are going to change because of the 1990s and skewed up. Bismarck, 80% of the years since 1875 have been drier than the current average. Fargo, North Dakota, 70% of the years have been drier than the current average. Sioux Falls, which I've used because I've spoken down there, 70% of the years have been drier than the current average. Same goes for Minneapolis, Des Moines, Springfield, Indianapolis, Columbus, all the state capitals. So in turn, the climate is drying, air quotes, apologize to all the air quote haters out there because of the statistics on it. So what happened in 2021 is the drought monitor, there's nothing wrong with this, the averages changed. So all of a sudden there was a lot more drought because the averages changed. They didn't do anything wrong. Laura's probably one of the authors back there, so I have to be careful what I say. But there was nothing wrong with that because that's all legit. But again, it's how are you playing sometimes with it. I'm a much bigger fan of using long-term rain trends, not the 30-year averages, because that's why crop yields have been pretty good, even though we're below average, is because we're really not below average, if you look at the long-term stuff. So, my 2 cents.
No, that's fair.
So we've pretty much, looked ahead, looked back a little bit, talked a lot about a lot of things, but what would be the take-home that you want this audience to go home with? Starting with you, Laura, what's the thing that you want them to remember from this?
You know, I'm optimistic on fall harvest weather, climate conditions this year with warmer trend here starting this week. You know, we need some drying down time. Not to say we're going to totally avoid, you know, mechanical drying after harvest, but hopefully we can reduce that a fair bit. Winter season, you know, still kind of a toss-up on precipitation, but, you know, looks like something probably near normal to maybe slightly wetter wouldn't be surprising. But I think we're setting up good shape now with our soil moisture recharge for the spring. So at least looking at soil moisture alone for spring season, I think we're looking at a good start in the eastern side of South Dakota, neighboring Minnesota.
Daryl, your take home.
I would agree everything with Laura said. I would agree with, and on top of that, I would then just say this so I don't repeat myself. If you're in Minnesota, South Dakota, North Dakota, we live in one of the most highly dynamic, interesting climates on the planet Earth. We just live in kind of crazyville. I like to tease people, if your ancestors came from Europe and you settled here, your ancestors volunteered to go to the gulags in Siberia, which the communists forced all the people to go to. Your ancestors volunteered to go to a very similar climate. So, you know, every year is different. Every year is unique. Enjoy it. It's a fun place to live. On top of what Laura said.
All right, well, we'd like to thank both of you for joining us and sharing your expertise and knowledge with all of us here. It's been quite a year, I think, weather-wise, and I'm sure that there's a lot more to look out for here as harvest approaches. Just for all of you, again, this is Laura Edwards and Daryl Ritchison. You can find both of them. Probably easiest to Google them, but real quick, how can people get a hold of you or the Climatology office?
Sure. I'm in the SDSU Extension Regional Center in Aberdeen, South Dakota. So that's where you can find me there. I'm also on Facebook and Twitter a little bit, or X, sorry, a little bit there as well. So you can find me on social media.
And Daryl, your social?
NDSU, I would do the Google search, and I'm only on X. That's the only social media that I do. And NDON, also only social media. Oh no, we just started a Facebook page because one of our stakeholders, we built a station, wanted to be able to post it to all of his friends on Facebook. So one of my staff created a Facebook page for NDON just for this one stakeholder. That's how we love our stakeholders. That's right. But so NDON's on Facebook and X. I'm just on.
Moving into the 21st century there with Facebook.
Well, you know, I just always enjoyed X because X is really popular with agriculture and weather. And so that's why I spend a lot of time on there. And so I just never, for no bad reason, I just never set one up. And then finally, my younger staff goes, yes, please do it. You run it, please.
Great. Hey, let's, oh, sure, yeah.
Daryl, do you think we're going to have your estimate more snow than we had last winter? I would not be surprised if we had the same amount of snow this winter as the last 2 winters combined, which would still be slightly below average. I really think precipitation-wise, it's going to be a very average winter. Yeah, and I also think it's, especially eastern North Dakota, after 2 warm winters will be at least average, if not a little bit below this winter. And so that'll be a little bit of change too. It's North Dakota, South Dakota. Winters are cold. We're all prepared for them.
Well, not to cut this short, but we got a schedule to keep to. So let's give a loud round of applause for our presenters. Thanks again. Stick around. We've got more for you here. Enjoy the rest of Big Iron Day 1.
It's all about nutrient efficiency, right?
Exactly.
I've taught you all the things that you know.
Oh, yeah. Here we go.
I'm Sherry Cook. I'm passionate about helping farmers with crop nutrition, and I'm here to help you with your operation.